With that, let me introduce Dave and have him come up. He's going to spend some time talking a little bit about his past, and I've already shared with you guys about who Dave is, and so he's going to tell his own story. He's going to tell it way better than I do, but I met Dave about probably 2 years ago or so, I don't know, through a networking event, and have since then been in groups with him a number of times and heard lots of his stories, and every time I hear his stories, I'm just more impressed because he calls things like they are. There's just no BS whatsoever. Like he's very real about life and about what works and what doesn't work. And the things that they've built and the experiences he's been through are very real. And he's all about accountability and ownership and the principles that they teach. And he'll share his personal stories and talk about some of the things that they're going through and the ways that people are changing their lives by embracing this principle of I own my life, I'm accountable. And it's not just me, it's also I own my life and I'm accountable for the people that are in my life. And I'm going to help them to honor those same commitments. And so with that, let's give an applause for Dave.
Good morning. We need to make a deal. Can I make you uncomfortable? Are we all adults? Because really, discomfort is the price of admission for a meaningful life. And I'm probably going to say some things that you might disagree with. Tough shit. But I want to put some principles out there. I want to say some things that I believe to be true, and over 55 years of experience that I really have learned that are true. And some of them might make you uncomfortable, but I really want you to just take, if they make you uncomfortable, usually when we get uncomfortable, it's because something is resonating. It's like, oh, God, I don't like it. That doesn't make me feel right. That's usually the case. Not always, but usually. So I want to start with this. I want to declare a fact, and that is, you can't love who you are if you hate the experiences that shaped you. We all need to recognize that our lifetime is limited. One of the biggest mistakes that we make is thinking that we have time. Nothing is further from the truth. I mean, think about it. All of us in this room take for granted, right? Time. We just keep doing things. We get preoccupied with things that don't have any value, don't have any meaning, and we just continue on this path, right? And before you know it, your life is over, and it's going to happen quicker than you think. We're continually tempted to dabble and to busy our lives with indiscriminate preoccupations. And multitudes of people, some of which are in this room, are living really scattered, broken, split lives, right? Where preoccupation really becomes the driving factor. And I want to ask you, what is your preoccupation? What is your preoccupation? What do you do with your free time, right? Who do you choose to engage with your full attention? What are you choosing to read? When you start thinking about how you spend your free time, that's what I want you to leave here with. Just start thinking about how you spend your free time. What are you doing with your life? Now look to your left. Now to your right. And maybe these people aren't the ones sitting at your table, but they are in this room. So I ask you, who do you allow to sit at your table? And no matter who you choose, you are by default foregoing something or someone else. And allow me to explain what that means, because that's the mistake I made for over 27 years of my life. I'll explain. My story really began when I was about 11 years old. I was drinking alcohol. My mom and dad drank. My dad partied and had motorcycles. He'd have friends over and they'd be drinking beer, and I'd go over to the refrigerator. I'd grab the first beer and I'd take a drink before I'd give it to one of his friends. And at the end of the night, right, I'd clean everything up and I'd take the last drink. And then at 12 years old, I'd be coming home from junior high school and I'd sneak alcohol out of his decanter and I'd replace it with water because, he'll never notice, right? And then he'd come home from work and have a drink, and after a while, he realized he wasn't getting the desired effect he was looking for. I was. As you can imagine, that conversation didn't go well, right? I'm 12. I'm stealing alcohol from dad, right? At around 12 or 13 years old, I'm smoking pot, and I had to be sneaky to do it. So pot wasn't the problem, my behaviors were the problem. And between the ages of 13 and 14, I did my first line of cocaine. We were all teenagers once, right? It's pretty difficult to get through your teenage years when you're not doing those things. I'm 13 and a half years old, I'm doing cocaine, nobody was safe. It's expensive. It was then, I don't know what it is now, but it was expensive in the 80s. Nobody was safe. I would literally be in my house, I'd be looking out, I'd be upstairs, looking out the window, waiting for the neighbors to leave, so I could run downstairs, go out my sliding glass door, over the wall, and break into their house. I break into my dad's safe. I get into his wallet, get the combination, get into his safe, steal his money. I'd manipulate neighbors, family. I did anything and everything I possibly could to support my habit. I mean, it was bad. I'm a teenager. I'm trying to get through high school, and I'm completely hooked on coke. Now, you're asking yourself, why is this important? We'll get to that point. I was the kind of kid that would go to high school and I'd have a vial of cocaine in my pocket. This is chapstick. And while the teacher was up at the board, I sit in the back there where Kent is at, and when the teacher wasn't looking, history class, math, English, whatever it was, I'd pour that coke between my pages. And when the teacher turned around, I'd pull the big pen apart, and I'd lean over and I'd snort coke in class. That's how bad it was. Somehow I managed to get through high school. It's not very difficult. It wasn't that hard to get through. And when I graduated high school, I graduated from cocaine to methamphetamine. And that really is when the wheels fell off. They were loose already, make no mistake about it, but that's when the wheels fell off. And I wasn't the kind of guy at 19 or 20 years old when things started getting really bad. Or when I graduated from high school, I didn't go to my buddy and go, hey, where are you going, college? Yeah, I'm gonna go deal dope. That wasn't what I did. It's just kind of what happened. I never set out to do it. Buy some, sell some. I wasn't stealing anymore per se, right? But buy a little bit, sell a little bit, buy a little more, sell a little more. I didn't realize I had an entrepreneurial gene in my DNA because I'd never had any reason to use it. Not that I was doing it for the right reasons then, but I was buying more, selling more, and pretty soon I realized, wow, I can do this, I can make some money. Well, guess what happened next? What do you think happened?
Got busted.
Got busted, right? Went to jail. My first prison term was 2 years. I go to prison for 2 years, I get out, I stay out for 59 days, I get busted again, I go to prison for 5 years. I stay out 60 days, so I'm staying out longer, I'm getting better at this. 2 years, stay out for 59, 5 years, stay out for 60, get busted again, go to prison for 6 years, get busted again, go to prison for 10. 2-year term, 5-year term, 6-year term, 10-year term. Back to back to back with no little time, no time out in between terms really. And literally, you guys, the day I got out of prison, I was on my way back. The day I got out, drugs weren't the problem. What was the problem? My behaviors. We'll get into that too. After my 10-year prison sentence, guess what happens? I get busted again. But here's the thing, it was really not that the other arrests were pretty, but I was in Huntington Beach, California, I'm upstairs. And if you guys, I did a TED Talk in 2016 that gives you some more details. But I'm looking out a window, there's a helicopter really high in the sky. And usually when the helicopters are floating around the city, they're just patrolling the city, right? You see them flying all over the place. This helicopter was way, way up there. It was just sitting there. So I'm at this house in Huntington Beach, I'm doing what I do, and a couple hours go by and I get ready to leave. The helicopter's still there. Ironically, I'm just sitting there doing, on the phone, doing what I'm doing, and he's just sitting there. And I thought, nah, no way. Leave that house, get my car, take off, and the cops were everywhere. They had already made a deal with people in the house. They weren't going to come in the house. They were going to wait for me to leave. Huntington Beach PD, Fountain Valley, Garden Grove, parole. And I had told everybody I knew that if I ever get red lighted again, I'm not stopping. I'd already been to prison 4 times. I know when I get busted again, and this is in the state of California, I'm going back to prison for the rest of my life. So I took him on a high-speed chase. When I say a high-speed chase, I'm on surface streets. It never really got that fast. But I had total wanton disregard for public safety. I was displacing vehicles, I'm up on sidewalks, I'm going through red lights, doing everything I can to get to a bridge in Huntington Beach so I could throw everything out the window, into the water. That was my thinking. They'd have to go down and get it, prove that's what I threw. You guys get it, right? I never made it to that bridge. For those of you who are familiar with Huntington Beach or Southern California, Atlantic and Magnolia, I get to that intersection, there's cops sitting there, they're parked, and I have a decision to make. Stop, let them arrest me, go back to prison for the rest of my life, or go through that roadblock and hope that they kill me. Then I opted for B. And it's, human nature is funny. I wanted to die. I did not want to go spend the rest of my life in prison. I'd already spent the vast majority of it there. I wanted to die. But when I went through the roadblock, I kind of hunkered down. It's this kind of human nature to protect yourself at the same time I'm trying to get killed. And I displaced those cars, made a left-hand turn. The cop closest to me did the pit maneuver, pursuit intervention technique, spun me out of control, up on an embankment. It was a strip mall of sorts. They pulled me out of the car at gunpoint and gave me one of the worst beatings I've ever had in my entire life. And all I remember is right at the end when I kind of came to, we're stop, we're going to kill him. And I'll be honest with you, if I was law enforcement at that time, I'd have done the same thing to me. I put people's lives in jeopardy. I was on a chase, not a high-speed chase, but a chase nonetheless. going through red lights, displacing vehicles. I didn't give a shit about anybody but getting away. And it didn't matter what happened. Anybody could have been hurt. So if I were the police at that time dealing with a guy like me, especially with my record, I'd have done the same thing. I don't know how they couldn't have done it. I wake up, I'm in jail, I go to court, my deal's 29 years. Anybody ever faced that kind of time, 29 years? Fought my case for a long time in the Orange County Jail pre-sentence. A couple of the ancillary charges had fallen off, and for the next year, every time I went to court, it was 22 years. 22, 22, 22. And in California, I keep going to court and firing public defenders. I'm trying to get it down to something manageable like 15, right? Had that judge, Pacheco, allowed me to get 15 years, I wouldn't be here today. I'd probably be back in prison for the rest of my life. But that judge was steadfast, and he was resolute in his resolve, if you will, and making sure that I got every day of those 22 years. And every time I went to court, he said, Mr. Durocher, you're wasting your time. Whether you go to trial or whether you plead out, you're getting 22 years when I get out of my courtroom. Kept fighting my case, kept fighting my case, kept fighting my case, and then I wrote a place called Delancey Street. Who's heard of Delancey Street? There's a couple of hands that have gone up. Delancey Street's a two-year re-education facility for people like me who have been long-term drug addicts, been criminals, lived their life on the streets. It really is the only place that a judge would send somebody like me. So I write Delancey Street a letter, they come, they interviewed me, they accepted me. I go to court, and the judge basically, without fussing, said, hell no, get out of my courtroom. Mr. Durocher, you're not Delancey Street material. I told you, you're getting 22 years. So I go back to my cell, I'm broken, I'm tired, and really for the first time in my life I was scared. Not scared so much of going back to prison. I'd already spent a lot of time there. I was scared that I was going to go to prison and die there. Right? And I'd already kind of lived there. So I wrote that judge a letter, 4 pages long, front and back. And I never told that judge that he was wrong in his assessment of me, because he wasn't. He had me dead to rights. I was everything he said I was. Make no mistake about it. I know who I was. And wrote that judge a letter, sent it to him, and I said, Your Honor, what do you have to lose? If I go to Delancey Street, right, and I get kicked out or I split, you can lock me up for the rest of my life, plus whatever new charges I pick up in the interim. Or the next time you see me, it's because I'm coming back to say thank you. 6 weeks later, I go to court. Some of you might remember what a phone booth looks like, right? Some of us older people might. In California, it's a tiny little cage, about half the size of a phone booth. Ankle irons, waist irons, handcuffs, jumpsuit. I'm sitting in this cage, and Judge Pacheco said, Mr. Durocher, against my better judgment, I'm going to give you the opportunity of a lifetime. I'm going to let you go to Delancey Street, but you're pleading guilty today to all of your charges, and you're signing a deal for 22 years. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever felt vertigo. Good news, bad news, completely unexpected. You know, you take that phone call and someone's passed away, or you find out that someone's just real, that kind of stuff. I'm sitting in this cage, I'm like, and I felt kind of dizzy, like, the judge is letting me out of jail today. 10 seconds ago, I was looking at 22 years. He's letting me out. My mom and dad lived in Vegas. I'm in Orange County, California. They came when they found out that I was going to Delancey Street. They came all the way out. They're waiting to pick me up. I leave that jail. There's a girl in the parking lot. We take off. We drive across the street. We read Bible verses for a while. Then my girlfriend shows up. I take off with her, and I leave my parents there. I had just gotten out of jail. I had been in for a year and a half fighting a case. I'm looking at 22 years. I get out. I don't even go to my parents. What do drugs have to do with the problem? Absolutely nothing. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I start feeling really bad. I call my mom. And I was just in St. George this weekend doing a big presentation at Dixie Convention Center, and my parents were there. I call her, and she's screaming and she's crying at the same time. It was really difficult to understand. Screaming and crying. As I was hours late, she knew exactly what I was doing. Basically told me, you've got 15 minutes to get to this parking lot, and your father and I are going back to Nevada. We're leaving you there. I was there in 15 minutes. They took me to Delancey Street. I got to Delancey Street in 2005. It's a 2-year program. It's completely free. Takes no money from the government. 2-year minimum. Ladies and gentlemen, I stayed there for 8.5 years. 8.5 years in a program. Most of you haven't held a job for 8.5 years. Not one, same job, right? Some have, but how many people have held a job for more than 8.5 years? Same job. So I don't know, about half you, right? But I stayed in a program for 8.5 years. The last 5 years that I was there, I managed the LA facility. Stayed for my 2, realized I needed another year. That's the beauty of the model. We'll get to that in a minute. Stayed a 3rd year, And I went to the Vatican and asked to stay a little longer, and then Mimi Silbert, the president of Delancey Street, came down from San Francisco. We had a meeting, and she said, David, will you stay 5 more years? I had no idea why she was asking me that. Stayed 5 more years, and ended up being there for 8.5 years. The last 5 years, she asked me to manage the LA facility. 250 residents living on property, 15 vocational training schools that generated all of the revenue. We took no money from the government. One of the best decisions I ever made was going to Delancey Street. Second best decision I ever made was staying as long as I did. Now you guys have all heard the bell curve, right? Right? I was way at the bottom of that bell curve. I needed to be there for a while. But in actuality, I could have left at 3.5 or 4 years. I knew in my heart that I was ready to graduate at about 3.5 or 4 years and go live my life the same way I had been living it there. I knew I was ready. There was no question about it. But I fell in love with the process. And for the first time in my life, I fell in love with Dave. And I don't mean I looked in the mirror and said, hey, Brad Pitt. That's not what I mean. What I mean is I fell in love with me, and I realized my life had purpose, my life had meaning, and I could go live a meaningful, purposeful life out there. I don't have to be a drug addict anymore, and I don't have to live my life in prison. I can actually live a value-centered life of integrity. But it's only because I was there for a long time, and I changed the behaviors that led me there. What were those behaviors? I was a liar, I was a cheater, I was a thief, I was a manipulator, I was a hedonistic, self-centered, self-seeking. I had become an animal. I was violent emotionally, violent verbally, and violent physically. There are things I got away with before I went to prison for those 4 terms that I should be doing life for. That's who I'd become. The difference between me and a lot of people is I own my shit. I know exactly who I was and exactly what I was doing and exactly, after many years of being there, what I needed to fix. When I say liar, cheat, thief, manipulator, and all those things, that was me on steroids. They didn't address my drug problem. I didn't have a drug problem. I had a behavior problem. I had a moral problem. My compass was askew. I needed to stay in a place for a long time and recalibrate that moral compass. And Delancey Street gave me that opportunity. 8.5 years later, after I'd been there, I graduated, got a job in Southern California, hauling heavy equipment. You know, when you see the pipeline construction in the middle of the street, it creates all kinds of havoc for us drivers. That was me hauling the heavy equipment in that hole, digging holes, and I hated my job, but I got this job here. Here I am getting out of Delancey Street, right? I got a job for $30 an hour. I'm like, $30 an hour? The last time I worked, I'd been out of the workforce for decades. The last job I had was the 80s. It was like in Southern California, like $7.25 an hour for minimum wage. I'm like, $30 an hour? You gotta be kidding me. I felt like I was gonna be rich legally. Now, I was making money illegally. But I took the job and was extremely grateful that I had the job. Right? And then I went from Burkett Construction in Southern California. Who's heard of the Bakken in the Dakotas? They're fracking for oil. I go up there and make completely stupid money. And the reason why I'll share with you why that's meaningful to me is when I say I went up to the Bakken, I went up there to the Bakken, was doing fracking. I worked 31 days in a row, made $17,000 the first month. Stayed there for 5 months and made what I refer to as stupid money. And you're probably thinking, well, why is that important? It's important because 2 things were happening. Number 1, I was having an affair with my checkbook, literally, right? I was making good money and the cops couldn't take it from me this time. Right? And I realized 2 things, that making money is fun. Who can deny it? Is it not? But saving lives was rewarding. I missed Delancey Street, but there's no paid positions. I can't go back to Delancey Street and say, hire me. They don't hire people. You're a resident. The whole time that whole time I was there, the 8.5 years I was a resident, I had worked my way up to the top and was managing the facility, but I wasn't even paid for it. For 5 years, I ran a multi-million-dollar organization for free because I wanted to give back, because I fell in love with getting people like me from where I was to where I had gotten. Just like those who stayed and helped me. So I'm up in the Bakken, I'm working, I'm going through all that, you know, the affair with my checkbook and all that, and I come back to Southern California, start doing small presentations at different programs, and then a God shot happened. Who's heard of Joseph Grenny? Some of you have heard Joseph Grenny, wrote the book, The Influencer. In that book, The Influencer, it features Mimi Silbert, the president of Delancey Street. He wrote it 20 years ago. And he thought to himself 20 years ago, someday, Delancey Street's got the cure for cancer. That's what he refers to it as, the cure for cancer, right? Helping people like us get their lives back. But it's not spreading. So, needless to say, long story short, him and Tim Stay, who's a local here, entrepreneur, reached out to me and asked me if I'd be willing to come to Utah to help get a replication of Delancey Street started here in Utah. So anyway, they fly to Los Angeles, we meet at LA Live. It's kind of a funny story. We meet at LA Live at Fleming's Restaurant, Joseph and Tim sit in front of me. I interviewed them first. If you guys know Joseph or Tim, you can ask me the question. I said, first of all, who in the hell are you? What's the genesis of thought behind this? What makes you think you can, and why would you want to? And in my opinion at that time, I'm looking at two LDS do-gooders, right? They just want to help the broken people fix their lives. That's how I felt. Make me understand why you want to do this. Who's first? And for the next hour or so, Joseph went for 30 minutes, Tim went for 30 minutes, and I knew I was in the presence of great men. And at the end of that dinner, they said, Dave, are you willing to come to Utah to help us get this started? I said, absolutely, if you don't quit in 6 months when it gets hard. That was over 7 years ago. We now have started the Other Side Academy. So what is the Other Side Academy, and why is all this relevant to what you're doing? Allow me to share. The Other Side Academy is a 2.5-year minimum re-education facility for men and women like myself. When I say minimum, the minimum required stay is 2.5 years. We are completely free. We take no money from the government. City, county, state, federal government, rich mommy and daddy, Medicaid, nothing. We do every bit of it ourselves, which allows us to do then what's best for the students. They can stay there as long as they need to. Why is that important? Before I tell you more about the Other Side Academy, let me tell you who we're not. Let's talk about treatment facilities. What's the average stay for a treatment facility?
90 days.
Let's go with 90 days. If anybody in this room thinks that I was going to get cured in a 90-day program, you need more help than I do. And the first question they ask you when you get to a 90-day treatment facility, how much money do you have? None. Go die. Now, they don't say go die. But if you get to a treatment facility and you have no money, you can't stay. So in essence, if you're out there using opiates, what are you going to do? You're going out to continue to kill yourself. If you do have money, it ain't yours. It's mom and dad's. They're sitting next to you. They've already mortgaged their house 3 times over. They've got $12,000 for this $20,000 90-day program. They hand it over to the admissions department. They take it, they count it, they go, okay, we're going to let you in. What do you have to do on day 90? Why?
Money ran out.
Think about the model. It's broken. That doesn't mean there isn't wonderful people working for these places that mean well, because there are. But the model's broken because it's built around a funding model, not a helping model. You have to leave on day 90, not because you're ready, because the funding has run out. Ladies and gentlemen, no one's ready on day 30, no one's ready on day 60, and no one's ready on day 90. I don't give a shit what you think. Nobody's ready on a particular prescribed day. And if I go to a program that mom and dad have to pay for, I've got no skin in the game. I don't. Once again, mommy and daddy to the rescue. Once again, Medicaid to the rescue. Once again, somebody else's insurance company to the rescue. For a problem I created. When I was going to jail, who was paying for me to be there? You were, the taxpayer. When I was going to prison, who was paying for me to be there? You were, the taxpayer. When I go to a program I can't pay for, who was paying for it? Somebody else. I'm a burden. I don't care how you look at it. I'm a grown adult that knows the difference between right and wrong, and everywhere I go, somebody else has to pay for me. Because of the decisions I'm making. I'm a burden. When I left Delancey Street, got a job, and ended up coming here, I never want to be a burden on anybody ever again. I've learned to stand on my own 2 feet and become a responsible adult that makes their decisions. And that's what's going to kind of lead us into what we're going to talk about here today, other than my story that got me to this point.